changed their plans with what they were doing with their catalog, with their Len Chandler left out, left back, left behind again. Okay, so now Denise is like, you know, really, this is like, this ain't right. But I go back to a lot of the books, a lot of the interviews that I compiled for this book, and draw my inspiration for going forward. It's like, look, this is a drop in the bucket. Okay, so they don't, you know, it's like people have suffered much worse than this. Okay, so we'll figure it out. We're going to keep on pushing. We're going to get this story out there, whether they want to or not. So as it turned out, we came to an agreement, and it was through the Bob Dylan Center's generosity that I got to publish this book and start a new publishing venture with my friend Kelly DeSaint, who some of you know from, Kelly, yeah, some of you know from his column and books, I Drive SF, and we decided that we would just do our own thing, and that's the good news. That's the why we have this book. So a lot of people to thank, and including all of you, some of my dearest friends that I look around here, and I'm just like, oh, I can't do it. I can't do this work without you, you know, because we do it together. And so thank you. I'm going to jump in where, and this is all to explain partly why, through the lens of Bob Dylan's story, am I telling Len's story, right? It's like, at this point, why aren't we just telling Len's story? Why are we talking about Bob Dylan? Well, I had this long essay that they paid me for, so it had some Bob Dylan in it, and so we're talking Len, talking Bob Dylan, Len, you know, blues. Okay, we start with Len. I first saw Dylan at the Café Wa playing harmonica with Fred Neil, and he would occasionally play a Guthrie song by himself. We'd sit in bars and I'd be reading the paper and underlining stuff, said Chandler, a classically trained musician from Ohio who developed a new skill in the Village and beyond it. In Greenwich Village, he spun stories out of headlines and ultimately his lived experience as a black man in America. Raised to fight for racial justice in his hometown of Akron, Chandler would find his voice as a topical songwriter in Greenwich Village and then make his way to the front lines of the historic Southern voter registration drives in Georgia, Mississippi, and Alabama. There, he discovered that his voice could move a crowd of thousands. Despite no training as a community organizer nor any background in old-time religious singing styles, after his performances down south, Chandler was pulled into the fight for civil rights on the strength of his ability to deliver a song. From there on, he became a lifelong movement worker. So we're going to fast forward, and now he's in New York, okay? And no, he's not in New York, but I am going to fast forward to when he's in New York, I think. That's the way to do it. He's on his way to New York. A University of Ohio professor who befriended Chandler had some upcoming business in New York and offered him a deal. The guy said, "If you help me with the driving, I'll pay for everything," said Chandler. He took me to New York, and I got a job at Columbia University as an elevator operator for the summer. He took me to Greenwich Village, to Izzy Young's bookstore on McDougal Street. This guy with his hair all hanging in his face was playing the guitar. It was Dave Van Ronk. I'd do my elevator operator job, get about 4 hours sleep, and run back, said Chandler. After the summer, I got another job as a counselor for boys at the St. Barnabas House at Bleecker and McDougal, a home for women and children in need. I'd take care of the kids, bathe them, do homework, and walk them to school. Between graduate studies at Columbia, these 8 to 11-year-olds were under my care every day, and I took them to Washington Square Park to roller skate. And when they were skating, I started playing and singing on the square, and people would come by. Among the passerby was the psychedelic clown who'd come to be known as Wavy Gravy. Hugh Romney said, "Look, we're going to Hartford with poets, and we want you to come." but you gotta dress down, dress hip. I picked up some black slacks and a red shirt like Harry Belafonte. Hugh said, "No, man, that ain't it." Romney pointed Chandler to Orchard Street, where he could find black jeans, chambray work shirts, black boots, and a bandana for the neck. "That became my folk costume," said Chandler. "After that, he asked me to play between the poets at the Gaslight. It was a whole poet scene, late 58, 59, not singers then." Chandler performed with Romney and humorist John Brent. Café Wa was always a poet scene. He met Bob Kaufman, who would become a noted beat poet. "Green, Green Rocky Road" I wrote with Bob Kaufman. The pair rooted their song in a children's melody from the Georgia Sea Island Gullah tradition and turned it into a contemporary folk standard, popularized by Van Ronk. Van Ronk would later recall Chandler as one of the few black singers on the mostly white scene. One night after a gig at the Gaslight, Chandler was jumped, though he survived the attack owing to his experience with the lateral drop, a wrestling move he learned as a youth. On another occasion, he wasn't so lucky. "When I got beat up, my head cracked," he said. "Dylan and Jack Elliott both came to see me at the hospital." Dylan remembered an early, perhaps first encounter with Chandler in a room above the Gaslight. Chandler had his own recollection. When Dylan came to town, he wasn't writing much. His songs were Woody-esque, songs like "Hey Ho, Lead Belly, I Just Want to Sing Your Name," a riff on Guthrie's song in tribute to the unjust trial and execution of Sacco and Vanzetti. Dylan's song to Woody was sung to the tune of Guthrie's 1913 massacre and included a phrase from Guthrie's song based on a real-life tragedy in Michigan. Someone maliciously yelled fire in a crowded building occupied by striking miners and their families on Christmas Eve. I know you guys all know that, so okay. "I hadn't started writing, but know exactly when I did," said Chandler. "December 15th, 1961. I was playing up in Saratoga Springs, New York, and on the front page of the newspapers, the Daily News and the Post, there were similar pictures of a terrible school bus accident in Greeley, Colorado. What was so heavy about it, everyone had seen the picture and the kids messed up on the ground. I wrote about it and played it in my set that night, and when I finished, people were just looking at me." Leaving the stage, he went to the dressing room, changed into a new shirt, and put his guitar away. "And then the applause started," he said. "People were pounding on the tables." Chandler's song, sometimes referred to as Bus Driver, about Dwayne Harms, who survived the crash in which school children died, was never recorded, but its melody is known, its existence a talking point in folk circles ever since Dylan introduced a song he called Emmett Till on Cynthia Gooding's radio show in 1962. "I stole the melody from Len Chandler, and he's a funny guy. He's a folk singer guy. He uses a lot of funny chords, when he plays, and he's always getting to want me to use some of these chords, trying to teach me new chords all the time. Said, 'Don't those chords sound nice?' And I said, 'They sure do,' and so I stole the whole thing." The murder of Emmett Till was a catalyzing event in the civil rights movement, entwined with the imminent Southern voter registration drives and the freedom rides from the North that would begin in 1961. The bombing of the buses and targeting of civil rights workers would begin soon after. Dylan's ballad tells the story of the 14-year-old from Chicago who was murdered while on summer vacation in 1955 in Money, Mississippi. It was a lynching, typical of the Jim Crow South, but its aftermath was something else entirely. Till's mother, Mamie, insisted on an open casket funeral for all the world to see. Newsprint pictures of her son's mutilated body and a mother's grief were purposefully placed across the pages of the national black newspaper, the Chicago Defender, and the weekly magazine Jet. As media coverage persisted, the trial proceeded, and an all-white jury acquitted Till's killers. The horror of Till's murder continued to unfold throughout the 50s, including a public confession without legal consequence. The public outcry contributed to the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1957, the first of several civil rights acts intended to accomplish desegregation and protect the voting rights of African Americans. Chandler and Dylan shared an interest in their times and in time spent building the scaffolding for their songs, searching for angles, finding out how to place matters of their times on the page and on the stage. Back to Dylan speaking. Besides being a songwriter, he was also a daredevil. One freezing winter's night, I sat behind him on his Vespa motor scooter, riding full throttle across the Brooklyn Bridge, and my heart was just about shot up in my mouth, wrote Dylan. The story continues as the pair slide across the bridge in high wind and ice. No doubt about it, heaven was on his side. I've only felt like that about a few people. I think Dylan's new record had just come out, said Chandler of that time. We took his first record and 2 guitars on my motor scooter, and we went to see Woody Guthrie in the hospital. They didn't have a record player, and so Woody just put Dylan's record under his pillow. We took out our guitars and sang Woody songs. You know, I'm condensing an already condensed version. Okay. Well, at a gig in Rhode Island, Len heard that Pete Seeger was there. So I'm jogging, and I see this big, tall figure jogging, and it's Pete. And I start telling him about this song I wrote. Chandler was open to learning more about folk tradition, and so he accepted Seeger's invitation to the next song conference being organized in Atlanta. Young people were rallying for voting rights, and Seeger had commissioned Charles Neblett, Rutha Mae Harrison, Bernice Johnson, and Cordell Reagan, the Freedom Singers, to raise funds for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee to register voters throughout the South, and Chandler attended. He found that he had a facility for on-the-spot secular rewrites of spiritual songs, and it was a service that was much needed by the movement for singing at marches, sit-ins, and in jails. Cordell said, "Call your wife and tell her you're not coming home." And I said, "Where am I going?" And he said, "Arkansas." The voting rights campaigns organized by SNCC had continued across the South for a year, from the summer of '62 and into the summer of '63, and concentrated in Mississippi.
We can't hear you, Denise.
What happened?
Oh, there we go.
Is that what happened?
Yes, you just turned your head.
Oh, okay,
Eric did it.
okay, okay.
Better.
Okay, so this, yeah. So anyway, they went down to wherever they went. Yeah, Greenwood? No. They across the South, summer of '62 and into the summer of '63, concentrating in Mississippi in the wake of the June 12th assassination of NAACP Field Secretary Medgar Evers by the Ku Klux Klan, in case you're unclear. Okay, one of the song lyrics Chandler rewrote before he started to write his own melodies became a movement anthem. "Move On Over," or "We'll Move On Over You," was sung to the tune of the Battle Hymn of the Republic, its final line trading out "marching on" for "moving on." There are a few versions of how Dylan got to the voter registration rally event in 1963 in Greenwood, Mississippi. In one, he was invited by the New World Singers, Gil Turner, Happy Traum, and Rob Cohen. Or, as singer-activist Theo Beckett tells it, Dylan was writing important songs that could be part of the arsenal and weaponry of the movement, but with a caveat. He doesn't have any first-hand experience or real awareness of what's happening. Movement workers reasoned he should experience the trouble firsthand. Like Chandler, Beckett had attended Seeger's song and organizing conferences, had sat in on strategic voter registration sessions and instructive workshops on how to be an ally from the North. Dylan's manager, Albert Grossman, at first balked, but Beckett said he would see to it that all costs were covered and that he would personally accompany Dylan. Beckett said he observed the songwriter on an airplane taking notes on the back of envelopes and performing only a pawn in their game the next day. A few weeks after Greenwood, a similar cohort of folk performers went to Newport for the annual festival, culminating in what we now know as the archetypal civil rights folk era moment. Seeger, Peter Paul Mary, Freedom Singers, Dylan and Baez holding hands, leading a sing-along of We Shall Overcome to close out the show. Chandler was not among those assembled in the famous photograph. It was only through my direct action after I went to the conference in the South that I felt like I contributed anything to the movement, he said. It wasn't just because of the marching, it was because I was able to see firsthand all the things that were happening. As the summer ended, Chandler rolled into D.C. from Boston to meet the musicians, the movement workers, and civil rights leaders gathered at the historic March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Blah, blah, blah. You know the detail on that. Okay. And what happened was, after I did my part, Dylan and I walked away, just walking around, sitting on the edge of the monuments, behind the Lincoln Memorial, smoking, continuing to talk. And then we started hearing Martin doing the I Have a Dream section of his speech. And we said, hold up, listen to this dude blow. This is wonderful. That's what I remember from the speech, being behind another monument with Dylan and silencing ourselves and sitting in amazement as we heard that speech unfold. Chandler hadn't been courted by record labels like his fellow folkies during the great folk scare of 1958 to 65. A lot of people were getting recorded around me, and I was the only one that was closing the show all the time, and I'm talking about all the time. And I wasn't getting any nibbles. I made an appointment to see John Hammond and sang him 2 songs, and he gave me a contract that day. And that was weird. It was good and bad, said Chandler. He had no idea what to do with me or around me or anything. He said he welcomed the opportunity to record me as he would have liked to have recorded Leadbelly in his prime. Leadbelly, musically gifted and influential as he was not a formally trained musician, as Len was. Leadbelly was born on a plantation, served several prison terms between 1915 and 1940, including a stay at Louisiana State Penitentiary, Angola, before arriving in New York, where he also served a jail term. Chandler was not at all like Leadbelly. I got Bruce Langhorne to play guitar with me and Bill Lee to play bass, said Chandler of his black accompanists, seasoned session players, and veterans of the folk scene, including Dylan's recordings. At Newport that year I played Shadow Dream Chaser of Rainbows, said Chandler. Somewhere there's a real stupid review of that night in one of the Newport papers. I wish I still had it, even though it's still stupid. It said, Dylan was the showers and Chandler was the rainbow. They were just pissed off because he was playing electric. At the festival's protest song night, Chandler broke a string and riffed a bit about getting while he got recalibrated. I said something like, I wish we'd use all the power we have to stop doing the jive things we're doing in Vietnam and Laos, and I got booed. Chandler had shared the stage with Guy Carawan, Bernice Johnson, Fannie Lou Hamer. As leader of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, Hamer's commitment to voting rights culminated in her speech at the 1964 Democratic Convention, protesting Mississippi's all-white delegation. Her televised appeal and the movement behind her made way for the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Hamer, as it turned out, had sung the way to freedom, turning the spirituals' Go Tell It on the Mountain and This Little Light of Mine into marching songs. That year, Chandler wrote an indictment of Governor George Wallace, Murder on the Road to Alabama, during the marches from Selma to Montgomery in 1965, following the murder of civil rights worker Violet Liuzzo. The Freedom of Information Act has over the years revealed that countless artists, entertainers, public intellectuals, and private citizens were under constant surveillance during and beyond J. Edgar Hoover's reign of the FBI. Sonia Sanchez, in one of her books, was talking about a guy coming to her and saying, look, if you lay off this stuff, being an instigator, rabble-rouser, making people less patriotic, your voice will be enhanced 100-fold, said Len. If you don't, you'll be silenced. They really told us, you make a deal, you cut this out, you can have all that. He paused to reflect on the memory of Cordell Reagan, the freedom singer who'd set him on his own path as a movement singer. My friend Cordell, they really muscled Cordell big time to get him to inform or change his sound. When I say muscle, harassment, following, steaming open stuff, direct intimidation. I didn't know it at the time, but his wife told me after he died, I think he was killed. As the civil rights era was winding down and the Black Power era warming up, the winds of change sent Chandler in search of something else. He pursued publishing poetry. Black arts poet David Henderson had introduced Chandler's work to Langston Hughes, and the pair kept a correspondence going until Hughes passed. That story is told more in detail in Keep on Pushing. I held in my hand the telegram that Langston Hughes had sent Len, congratulating him on his poetry. It was something. Okay, so he's a poet too, Len. Eventually, Chandler, like Dylan, would make his home out west. He stuck with the craft of songwriting, passed it on to others, and became a founder and facilitator of a songwriters workshop in Hollywood. Occasionally grabbing opportunities to write for commercial purpose, but usually passing on anything that would mean compromise in order to make big money. And there's some funny stories about that. He continued to perform early into the 21st century, mostly at political fundraisers and benefits for radical left solidarity efforts against perpetual wars and for racial justice, which was where we ran into him a few times. Sweet memories. Since his time rallying for voting rights in the Deep South, in the civil rights era, scratch that. Just rewind that. That's not on the tape. I'm going to end with this. In 2012, Dylan received the Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest honor awarded to a civilian by President Barack Obama. Chandler did not seek nor receive acclaim for his contribution to American democracy or in the fights for equality and racial justice here and afar. Though he was occasionally asked to recall the events of the 60s that shaped him, he declined most opportunities to revisit the village that made him into a folk singer and then sent him in search of something more, beyond Akron, beyond New York City and Los Angeles. Chandler kept looking toward a better tomorrow today as he changed with his times. And while time still takes time, change can happen in an instant. The people that will really continue to successfully struggle are people who are able to maintain their focus through all the barrage of distractions and keep their eye on the prize, he said. 60 years to the day after the historic March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom on August 28th, 2023, Len Chandler died at home in Los Angeles, 88 years old. Thank you, Len. We hope that you are receiving this. At the very least, I hope his family and closest friends in Los Angeles know how much, there are those of us who still remember and would like to honor his memory. And this is a small way that you can do that. The purchase of the book will mean that some of the sales, after we've recovered the cost, will go to voting rights organizations, and specifically in Georgia, where I have some fond memories of time spent and where they really need your help to protect voting rights. Fair Fight is one organization that I have chosen. I'm taking feedback. I would love to hear from you. There's another organization called Democracy Fund, and these folks are poll watching and doing what they can to protect voting rights. So with that, I will open for questions briefly. Eric, I don't know what the time looks like because I went on and on. Okay.
What I think we'll do is swivel that mic so it'll pick up for us their questions and
Oh, yeah.
have you use that handheld
Oh,
mic.
yeah. Oh, and it's right
So
here.
I think all we have to do is swing this around this way.
fantastic.
Look at how
How's
efficient that
doing?
is.
Is that all right? Yeah,
I think it's going to be fine. I don't
Okay.
think we're going to have any feedback question problems. Everything should be fine.
Oh, I hope we don't have any feedback.
No, we don't. Well, we want
I mean,
feedback,
I would
but we don't
encourage
want
feedback,
that.
but, you know. Yeah, David.
Yeah, I thought I'd mention a couple things. Old memory I have about Len Chandler back when I lived in Boston in the 60s was I remember reading, and I think it was in either Broadside or Sing Out, that he changed the term in a poetic sense from butterfly to flutterby, and always referred to them as flutterbys, which I think is a much better, much more poetic way of describing their movement and what they are.
That's great. You know, that's the thing. He was a word guy, right? And I don't know, but I think we could probably, you know, track this and prove it. The expression that we use, keep on keeping on, he claims to have coined it. And if you look at its use in popular music, I mean, I don't know about, you know, on the street, but in popular music, I think his use of it in a song, it may be the very first time, you know, before we hear Curtis Mayfield and then like thousands of others after that. But yeah, Flutterby.
Also, I believe that the Freedom Singers also sang it on March, and we just lost Bernice Reagan Johnson.
I'm glad you mentioned that because every time I came across her name, I was like, yeah, Bernice Johnson, what a song talker and a singer.
The Labor Chorus sang at Highlander for their 75th anniversary, and Bernice Johnson Reagan and the Freedom Songers were all there, so it was a great event.
Oh wow, she was great. Right, keeping traditional spirituals alive, really, you know, for the secular audience largely. Yeah. Questions, comments, feedback.
I'm going to go out and try find all his CDs now, because I just looked through my collection and I don't
Okay,
have
well
any.
here's the
I
bad
was
news.
surprised to see that.
I think when we wrap this, we can't broadcast the music. It would have been nice, but you know they have all those rules with that thing, you know, streaming, and you got to pay the musicians for their. Yeah, we can't stream the songs. But the bad news is you cannot get Len's material on a CD. You would need to get vinyl. So
okay,
you can
I'll go looking for vinyl.
Go looking for vinyl because you'll find the records To Be a Man and The Loving Kind. And then he's, you know, shows up on compilations here and there.
I actually better look through my vinyl collection. And
You
see
might
if I-
even have
See
it.
if I have it in there.
Yeah.
Who used to come to Western Workers? Who was,
Where were you
So
on
freedom.
August 28th, 1963?
who used to sing?
Anyone watch it on TV when you were a kid?
Uh,
Michael?
Jimmy Collier.
Jimmy
Nice.
Is that who you mean?
Collier? Yes.
No, Michael behind. There's another Michael behind Michael. Yeah, he did.
Do you want to talk about that movie that he's in?
I'd love to talk about FTA. You know what that means, right?
Fuck the Army.
There you go. Yeah. That was a musical comedy troupe headed up by Jane Fonda and Donald Sutherland. They went all over Southeast Asia, also in the group Paul Mooney, you might know, as collaborator with Richard Pryor. Paul Mooney, Holly Near traveled with them. Help me out, anybody who knows. Anyway, Francine Parker made a film of those years, right? And you can find it. I had wanted to organize a screening of it. It plays once in a blue moon. They restored it recently. Like, when I say recently, I mean in the last 10 years. And you can probably call it up on YouTube for $1.99. But yeah, they played for the troops, but it was not really like what's it called when the people go?
It wasn't like Bob Hope or anything like
Yeah,
that.
it wasn't a USO tour thing. It was a bunch of guys who were ready to bail, and they were encouraging them to do so at great risk and cost, to their careers. I mean, everybody knows how Jane Fonda was treated. Another person does another thing. Since I wrote this book and everything, like we talked about all these people, how many of these people have passed? Harry Belafonte, Donald Sutherland, we're just talking Bernice Johnson. I mean, it just like,
Ain't getting any younger.
no, these times, right?
Old people keep dying, goddamn.
Yeah, they really, yeah. But I think to me, it's like, if they're not here to tell the stories, who is going to keep the stories alive? And this was like a little tiny, drop in the bucket here. One guy who made a difference, but there are so many stories like this, and those are the stories that I'm interested in covering, and I try to find them. They're out there. I was teaching a class before we started tonight, and the class is filled with San Franciscans, 65 and older, and they all have these unique, beautiful stories about how they got to San Francisco, why they came here, what they did when they got here, and I just want a book of all of those, because they're extraordinary people, every single one of them. People still living in the city, hanging on, doing their thing. I have one student who's well up into her 80s, maybe 90. So, love hearing the stories, the hidden histories, the secret histories, the shadow histories. There's a whole thing. It's not up to me to interpret Len's lyrics or interpret my own interspersion or interpolation of his lyrics in the book from the song Shadow Dream Chaser of Rainbows. But when I started this project, I recognized that this is one of those classic shadow histories, and that his own lyrics to his own song tell the story about how he was a man in the shadows, and that he didn't go chasing for gold. He went for something else, and he found great riches there. And so that side of the story appealed to me too.
I'm just so glad you're bringing back his memory, because it makes me remember and want to go out and find out more now. See what I can find, because it's like a missing chapter in a personal history, in the history of movement, in the civil rights movement and the musical movement.
Yeah. And it's also still very much alive. When I had, when I was doing the research for this book, I thought, now who do I know who had done some organizing in Mississippi in recent years? And of course, we had a poet laureate. Well, we still do have a poet laureate in town here, Tongo Eisen Martin, who actually did organizing in Mississippi, and that he shared this lineage actually with Len, who had worked in poetry with David Henderson, and Tongo also worked directly with David Henderson, right? And then he had this movement connection in Mississippi, and I was like, wow, this is like, it's still happening. It's just that we in the North, or we in California, we have very little connection with what's happening in rural Mississippi. Just like, I have very little connection to the voting rights struggle in Georgia, but it's important that I do what I can from here. I mean, so like you're saying, this is how we keep Len's memory alive, and there are younger people doing the work, and thank goodness for them,
So,
thank you, Denise, for doing this. It's very sad to me how the cultures are so separated, and he wasn't praised and on purpose, and it's just very sad. But I'm still grateful that you've done this.
What was that? That was
Sorry, just trying to catch
a, okay, sorry. Thank you, Gail.
So was he able to sustain himself as a musical artist in post-folk era? Or what?
Interestingly, I didn't go into all the details. Some of it's in the book, and you can find out about him. He had this thing called the Songwriters Workshop, and it was and Peter might be able to tell you a little bit about it. It was kind of like a thing, at least in the 80s and 90s, maybe in Hollywood, that a lot of people, like up and coming people, came through that workshop. So he made a living as a song coach, right? And yeah, go ahead.
They used to have nights at the Troubadour down in Los Angeles, and they would it would almost be sort of like a folk festival workshop where there'd be a number of people on stage trading songs, and they did that regularly. And he also started with the Songwriters Workshop. He started the magazine called Song Talk. I don't know if he made a living. I don't imagine he did off that, but it was quite popular, and it ended up being a book by Paul Zollo. Paul Zollo was the guy that Len put in charge of that, and it ended up being a tome that's in a lot of bookshops all over the world about, I think, songwriters on songwriting it's called. But that Len was the impetus for that too.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning. Yeah, thank you for that. He had so. In that regard, he had a lot of opportunity. Like, people would come through and want him to write songs for big names, or he may have even facilitated the writing of songs with some younger writers who did have hits, but that kind of thing didn't appeal to him at all. He was very much into sustaining African American arts and culture. He had a beautiful art collection. He was married to the actor Olga James, and she was a pioneering artist herself. She was appeared with Dorothy Dandridge and Harry Belafonte and Carmen Jones. She was married to, I always forget if it was Nat or Cannonball Adderley. Cannonball. She was married to Cannonball. So it's fair to say that there was some income coming in that way. He built his own home in Glendale. I mean, this is a story, for the ages. So I would like to say that this is the condensed version. Wouldn't it be great, though? Speaking of what Gail was saying, it's like there's no market for the story for a writer with my book scan numbers. It's a hard sell to get people interested in this story, and I tried, right? But if you consider all the names attached and everything that he did and where he went, and I mean, it's a history of the country, and it's a history of racism, and it's a history of resistance, and I think it would be a great story for someone to tell. I was thinking I'm going to send it to Stanley Nelson. The documentary maker Stanley Nelson. I think if Stanley Nelson's, he'd be like, yeah, we got to, I just want people to know about Len Chandler, and know that there are other people still living, hopefully, mercifully. He was 88. Belafonte was 90 something. And I'll just add to this thing about the where we intersected with the Dillon Center. So last year was the 60th. It would have been an opportune time to gather the living folks, and some of them were still living. And now that it's 61 and some of them have passed, the moment kind of passed in terms of from a marketing perspective, right? It's like, this is the sad reality of how we're living, It's like, so it comes down to broadsides and pamphlets and shouting on the corner and raising a sign and knocking on doors and writing postcards. Erica kindly was going to get a neighborhood organizer here tonight, and she was busy organizing. But I don't have to tell this room. Like I said, I know you all, and I know what you're going to be doing and what you are already doing. But I was hoping that we would have some younger people here or some folks that needed an education about voting rights. Because I know that I was kind of fired up, like I said, after talking to my friends last week about what I was doing with the book, and then the convention, which, you know, it's okay to roll your eyes, but talking to some of you, we agreed that it was kind of nice, you know, even though there's a lot of problems and they continue and there's a lot of contradictions and a lot of unresolved things, we still felt hope and, you know, and a will to move forward. Like, keep on keeping on. The movement's moving on. So, thank you all. Oh, and then Eric, thank you. Thank you.